All right, we are recording.
All right, thank you. This is Janet Hurley, Chair of the Land Use Review Board. It is 1 p.m. on the 7th of July, 2025, and I will ask each board member to introduce themselves as I see you on my screen here. Brooke.
Brooke Dingledine, board member present.
Kirsten.
Kirsten Sultan present.
Alex.
Alex Weinhagen, board member. Good to see you all.
And Sarah will be unable to join us today. Sarah had, so we are good to go with a quorum. Bear with me, I only have one screen on with me today, so I have to find the agenda, which is here. So next on the agenda updates. Any updates from any board members? Sorry, hearing none. I'm gonna have to say hearing none because I can't see you all. I can only see one of you right now.
This is Kirsten, none for me.
Okay. And none from Brooke?
No, thank you.
Okay. Do we have any public that wishes to comment on non-agenda items? See, I guess not. So next on the agenda, operations, budget, and legal updates. Pete, are you with us?
He is.
Yeah, just got on. Thanks.
Any
Yeah.
updates for us?
Let's see here. No, I think, yeah, operation wise, no.
Okay. Rachel, anything from you?
I have nothing to add, thanks.
And Allison, any legal updates?
We do have an item later for appeals that relates to a new appeal being filed, which we may be discussing in executive session, but just flagging that item coming up in the agenda. And today is the deadline for motions to reconsider, motions to alter, amend in the Divided Sky Foundation case, which has previously been discussed. So I don't have any further updates beyond those two at this time.
Sorry, let me find the agenda again. So the next on the agenda is the environmental benefit spending guidance discussion. This is an initial discussion to consider how the Land Use Review Board fits in with the guidance that ANR is putting out in terms of how we allocate our funds. So it's a budgeting issue, and we are less obviously relevant to this question than a lot of the other covered agencies because we don't purchase land, we don't put money into community health programs, and so I guess initially I just ask whether board members had a chance to review at least the executive kind of summary that ANR put out, and then to ask how you might envision our reporting. What aspects of our budget do you envision relevant to this question that we will need to report on a, I guess, every 3-year basis starting early next year? So. Alex.
Yeah, so I read more than just the executive summary. I tried to digest most of the documents that were provided And honestly, yeah, my first thought was, why are we included in this? It seemed not so relevant to our organization. With that said, the piece, the part of our organization that I think maybe could be relevant would be our enforcement actions. I don't know how we would judge our most basic element of what we do in terms of permit review, jurisdictional opinions, permit review, and applications and approvals as really being part of this. But perhaps on the enforcement side, where we spend our time and staff resources to pursue enforcement actions could be. So that was my first thought, but I was kind of curious to hear from the rest of you whether you felt like this was, other than the enforcement side, really applicable to the Land Use Review Board. The examples given in the document seem a little stretched in terms of the specific examples that they gave for our organization. It sort of seems like if those are examples, then every Act 250 review and almost all of the criteria would be relevant. But I don't really think that's the way we should be looking at this. What do the rest of you think?
I had the same sort of initial thoughts that you expressed, Alex, that, you know, maybe in our enforcement reporting, we would look at the areas in which we are doing enforcement and whether there are EJ focus populations in the vicinity of some of our enforcement work, and versus, you know, enforcement in and around the country club, you know. I mean, you know, so definitely I think there's something there. But I also think that maybe as we develop a community engagement plan, and that plan identifies, you know, who we're reaching out to and how we are informing them about how they can be involved in our process. So, you know, maybe there's something in, you know, allocation that we put toward that engagement, and as relevant, you know, maybe eventually developing materials to help explain our procedures and processes and how people can plug in and that sort of thing. Brooke is nodding. Brooke, what do you have?
I only had a chance to look at the executive summary and really just eyeball the document, so,
Mhm.
but I felt a little lost in terms of our role. And so for me, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it occurred to me that the most actionable steps we can take maybe goes back to the environmental justice advocate position to make the actual process more, you know, more accessible, to educate and try to fulfill this notion in a practical way. And I don't know whether that's the right thing to come in here. Is this, you know, an overlap of Venn diagrams or not? I'm not really sure, but I feel very untethered about implementation of this.
Yeah. So I think what you're suggesting is sort of maybe as a piece to this community engagement programming, you know, we don't just put out printed materials and information on our website and whatnot, or maybe even tabling here and there, I don't know, but that we have a position devoted to outreach around these kinds of issues.
Or even, you know, that we'll take some financial responsibility for a portion of it. Since it does apply to other programs as well.
Right.
Kind
Right.
of notion.
Yep. Kirsten.
Yeah, I was also feeling a little untethered and unsure. I agree with the comment about enforcement. The other thought I had is maybe with respect to the tier 3 mapping work and any spending that we might incur to maintain mapping, develop mapping, um, to ensure that the, the benefits and burdens are, equitable, that maybe that could have a nexus to this obligation.
Maybe, yeah. We are tasked with looking at tier 3 and through the EJ lens. And
Right,
so it is part of that.
but this is
Um,
spending specific. So
yeah.
if there's spending, maybe that fits in.
A certain portion of it is, yeah,
Yeah,
Alex.
Yeah, I want to emphasize what the guidance documents says in terms of protocol. First, we need to do this for the 3-year financial window that ended on June 30th of this year. So spending that we did, that our program had over the last 3 years, not going forward. I mean, eventually it will be going forward too, but
Yeah.
at least in the first round, it's a look back. And two, the steps that it outlines in the document are, first, identify what the environmental benefits that our agency provides. And then second, report on investments we've made that resulted in environmental benefits within, communities throughout the state. And that's where I think the untethered part happens for me too, because I think that our program delivers environmental benefits just as a function of the permit process that we do. But it's not the same. It's just like you said, Janet, it's not the same kind of environmental benefit that I think this law was really focused on and intended for, which is discretionary, or I guess non-discretionary, but largely discretionary spending on investments, true investments, whether it's infrastructure or grant programs or what have you. And our program just doesn't do that. And we are an application-driven program for environmental review. We don't get to decide where projects get applied for, and we have nothing to do with that. So if we did try to make the case that, yes, just the simple review of Act 250 permits creates an environmental benefit and we want to categorize our spending on that, I don't think that's what this law was really intending to get after, even though they use some examples that talk about it a little bit. So yeah, that's where I feel like this, as much as we are a covered agency, I don't think this is largely intended for the kind of spending that we do. The investments that we make are largely in personnel. And those personnel drive our program and help with the review process. But yeah, we're not spending money on park and rides or green spaces or helping communities do research or planning projects or any of that kind of stuff. So that's why I was like, I'm not sure how this applies to us at all, but maybe enforcement. And then our investment is, again, largely personnel time, right? Our enforcement staff and our legal team. And I guess a bit of our time in terms of how much time the board takes to review enforcement actions.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, our spending is to administer an environmental permitting program that aims to protect the environment and to, guide development in the right places. So, the whole thing is relevant, but it's not yet. It's not. So
yeah,
one
especially
of the
on the
things
investment side. And
yeah.
I think it might be instructive for us to touch base with our friends at the Department of Environmental Conservation, because they also administer a variety of permitting programs that are there, specifically to protect the environment and to deliver environmental benefits.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to see if DEC was having a similar conversation and how they were puzzling it out.
So in fact, those of us who attend the Environmental Justice Interagency Committee, we actually had a meeting with the Public Service Department and the PUC because they feel very similarly oriented to this requirement. And yeah, we could have a second discussion and invite DEC too, just to sort of think through this a little further so that we have something to report that, you know, makes enough sense to similar covered agencies. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely see the link to the corollary with the PUC. It seems that seems like a good one to look at. And I would note, you know, if everyone hasn't had a look at the whole document, it provides you sort of a game plan of how to go about doing this. And one of the steps is to decide whether or not there's anything to report. And, you know, so there is an option to basically say, we don't have anything to report on this, and explain why. And that's presumably acceptable. I'd like to be able to report something. It's just that our program doesn't spend money on the kinds of investments that this law was really geared for.
Any other board comments here? And as I said, this is an initial conversation. You know, we can hear from Sarah as well on this, and Kirsten, go ahead.
Yeah, just confirming that, Janet, are you capturing this obligation as a component of your other EJ role? Okay.
Yeah.
So you'll be
I'll
taking the lead on the required report.
Yes, yeah. And just for the benefit of those listening or watching later, that the environmental benefits spending guidance, a draft was put out by the ANR within the last week, and there's a public comment period, and they have asked covered agencies to look at it and review it as well, and to spread the word. So all of these documents that we've referenced, the executive summary, there's also a flyer that has some public meeting dates that the agency is sponsoring on this, and there's a FAQ on the ANR website. And if you go to the ANR website and type "get involved" in the search bar, these things will pop up. So, anything else on this topic from anyone? Rachel.
Well,
Go ahead, Kirsten. Oh,
I was just going to ask kind of like the threshold question that is related to Alex pointing out the obvious, that most of our spending is personnel. Is that category of spending fall under this umbrella obligation? I guess that's kind of my question. So so the answer is yes.
Yeah, I mean, for instance, like the Department of Health has puts, you know, funding toward personnel who work with or work with EJ populations, maybe specifically. And, you know, that's not something that we do. We administer a permit program. So we're not investing in reaching out just to a certain population or to work around environmental health.
Well, what I'm trying to get at is within our personnel and the you know, the personnel resource that we dedicate to this work, is that reportable? Like, is that reportable spending? That's what I'm getting at. So it wouldn't
sort of
be something like contracted mapping services or something like other, you know, specific spending, but could it be a personnel cost that is part of this reportable spending?
I mean, I think other than the suggestion Brooke had about contributing or sponsoring a staffer within the administration somewhere. No, I don't think so. We're a covered agency. It's just part of, what we need to do. And, and I sort of think about the tier 3 mapping. It's just part of what we need to do when we do tier 3 mapping is to look at environmental benefits and burdens relative to the proposed tier 3 areas to be sure that they are equally distributed or equally distributing to environmental benefits and burdens. But Rachel, did you have something you were going to add?
Yeah, I did. I just wanted to point out that maybe coincidentally, maybe not coincidentally, we have I think there's a training on the calendar for later this week with Justin Kenny, who is, somewhat tangentially related to the environmental justice work here. But he tends to help agencies in tracking different kind of metrics for different kind of reasons. So this may be something that would be helpful to bring up at that meeting as well, just to get his thoughts on this and if he's heard similar, information or similar concerns from other agencies or, they may have strategized solutions. So I would just encourage you all to seek some additional information from him as well.
Thank you, Rachel. Good point. Any other comments on this before moving on?
Only one, Janet, and it's per Kirsten's question. Having read the 29-page document just this morning, it didn't in my mind make very specific references to personnel costs as investments, but it does talk quite a lot about programs and services that the covered agencies provide that relate to environmental benefits. So I think there is an intention to cover services, not just like physical investments. But again, it's not clear to me how that relates to our program and the personnel costs that our program pays for and dedicates to what Janet said is a permit review process, as opposed to a public health program or service that another agency might provide. It's a good question, I think.
I would say, that it's not just a permit review program, but that we also now have the authority to establish boundaries, jurisdictional boundaries. And so looking at how those jurisdictional boundaries may confer unequal burdens or benefits is an important piece to what we do. And I think also that our program allows for public input, and we do need to be, all comers. Everybody should have equal access to commenting on our work and to attending public hearings and whatnot. So yeah, there is a little bit more to what we do than just administering a permit program, and we strive to be a public-facing program. So and to allow input from all comers. Brooke.
Yeah, as you were talking, it occurred to me, we do have in the enforcement area an inability to pay application so that folks of lower income, if they have a fine or, I've forgotten whether we call it fines or whatever, but And they can fill that out. So at least maybe looking at our own program, because we do have some things already built into our processes to take account of, at least in that instance, lower income folks, to take account of their income and ability to pay.
Thanks. That's a good point. And Jenny is working with me on this. And Jenny, maybe you and I can look at our enforcement program and where enforcement cases occurred over the last 3 years and whether, for instance, that provision was ever used for fines. So
I
that's
will
part
note,
of,
yeah,
Go
on
ahead.
the enforcement side, I will note that by statute, any enforcement fees that we recover go automatically into the general fund. So there's definitely an element of choice as far as how we would direct those funds that we do not have, that I think EBSG is looking for. Maybe that's an area for people to consider. But
Right.
happy to do more discussion with the enforcement folks. The last thing I would maybe throw out is I know Aaron Brondike has done some really amazing work quantifying the effects of the permits that we have done over the
Okay.
last few, if we're looking for ways to translate, acres of agricultural lands and things like that. He's got a lot of that data. So those might be creative ways of thinking about how our spending does have some impacts.
Yeah. Kirsten.
Jenny, are you referring to the data that's now within the annual report in terms of permit outcomes?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
Okay, because I think it's actually Rachel that reads, goes through the permits and compiles that information, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, I'd be
Rachel,
curious if
I'm
it's
sorry
not
for
that
not
data,
giving
I'd
you
be
credit.
interested to see it. Yeah, Rachel's
True.
nodding.
True,
Just mention.
yeah.
Okay.
I think Aaron has put it in some really excellent presentations that I've seen, and that's probably why I accidentally credited him. I'm sorry for that.
No,
Rachel.
not at all. I'm happy to have somebody else be the presenter of such data. I just
When I asked
Rachel
the
behind
just
the
question,
pull it out
scenes.
of all the copious information that we have.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, and any public comment on this topic before we move on? Okie doke. Let's move on to studies and reports. So we have put out there for the world to see, well, not the world, we put it out there to partners, I guess I would say, and to staff, the guidelines for regional plan applications. And already got some helpful comment from one of our staffers, Kevin. I had a conversation with Kate McCarthy of the CCRPC last week. That was helpful. And what I'm looking for, well, we also sent it out to VNRC, to VLCT, and to state partner agencies. I'm hoping to hear back from those entities if they have comment on the guidance by the end of this week. So any questions about that? Kirsten?
Yeah, so will you be sharing a synopsis of the comments received?
Depends on what we get. I can, yeah, do that.
I mean, I'd just kind of be interested to know how that might inform some revisions moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, some of it's pretty technical, like,
Mm,
maybe the memo that gets submitted with the tier 1B requests should include or should be included in a resubmittal after a negative determination, it's
kind of
so, yeah, so it's,
process flow.
yeah, it's process flow. That's what these guidelines are. And so, maybe separate tier 1B status requests should be defined in the definition section. That was one of Kevin's suggestions.
Mhm.
So it's pretty technical stuff. You know, we'll see if there's more substantive stuff. Then yeah, we'll share.
And what's the deadline again that you've asked that people supply their comments by?
For this end of day Friday.
Okay.
And yeah, I don't know if you three have gotten a chance to look at the document, but Pete purveyed it out late last week, I think. Alex.
Yeah, so given that you're hoping to get some comments by the end of the week, are you thinking that this would just be on our agenda for the following week to hear some of those and take some comments from us as well, if we don't give them to you today?
Yes.
Okay. And the audience, is the audience really for the folks that are making applications, or is the audience sort of them and us, just so we have like a clear protocol for this process?
It's yes and more. You know, there are our partner agencies who are very interested in what we will be asking for and how we will be conducting these reviews and how we will be incorporating any of their feedback. You know, so and you know, members of the public who have those same questions about how we're going to be conducting these reviews of regional plans.
I think it's super valuable to have this level of detail, especially for our program and and those that will follow us, because we will not be the ones here forever. And the rest of the staff is the same. You know, we're all limited duration entities. So I think it's great. But you're gonna hear the same refrain from me that you've heard in the past, that if our audience is actually wants to be the folks who are going to be going through this, or the public that want to interface in it, it's a lot, right? It's highly technical. It's 20 pages. It's not easy reading. So like, I'm familiar with the work that the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission has done as a part of their regional plan and future land use mapping, public outreach, and I think they've done a pretty good job of doing like splashy 1-page or 2-page documents that are geared for the layperson to say, you know, you're interested, this is what we're doing, and if you are interested, here's how you can be involved. And I just wondering if that's a next step for us, if we're going to have something like that.
Yeah, that's the next step. I think we feel that we need to get the formal process, you know, in place pretty damn quick.
Yeah.
So because we're going to start getting applications in September from regional planning commissions, and you know, they've been doing a lot of work and outreach, each of them as they develop their draft plans before they submit them to us. I think in this first go round, at least the first few months of it, that the formal process, setting up the formal process is more important, and we can piggyback on the work that they're doing, but that absolutely we need to be developing our own 1-pagers that explain how people can be involved in what we're doing. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm thinking about regional planning commission staff being pretty good with a highly technical document like this, and they don't need much more. But potentially municipal planning commissioners who are volunteers and may have an interest in how the discussions they had with the regional planning commission staff were translated into a regional plan and then come before our board, which many of them are going to be scratching their heads about, like why is the Act 250 program involved in this? I'm spitballing here, but I could see like a one pager that's sort of geared for the general public and maybe volunteer local planners to understand
Yeah.
why this is important and how they can engage.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Any other questions about regional plan applications from anybody? Okay, then I'm going to yield to Brooke. Do you have an update or two for us?
Sure. So on the appeals study, I have scheduled possibly 5 1-hour meetings to put some calendar placeholders in, to circle back with the stakeholders to, based on the preliminary conversation of the board, just focus in on an hour to do a little bit more of a deeper dive on the Act 250 model of coming up to the board for appeals. Talk about the major components to it to see if we have general agreement on the changing to on the record review, that kind of thing. And also to see what ideas they have about whether, with regard to that limited amount of appeals coming to the board, what kind of change that we need to our own program. That part of the question may need to wait a little bit because while I think it's important to circle back with the stakeholders because we do have limited time to make sure that we get all of their input, I think at the same time, we need to do a little bit more data collection and analysis of our overall timeline of all of the other things that we have on our to-do list, in terms of all of our jurisdictional tier work and regional, reviewing all of the plans, et cetera, so that we can have a better notion of when we would be done with the majority of the work under Act 181, where we would be in a position then to function and transfer to an appellate board. And also the issue of capacity. So kind of looking at what's our personnel and what additional personnel would we need? For example, on an Act 250 appeal basis, would we be transferring our lawyers just to a different job? And do we need a tech person to be sort of the docket clerk and or the appeals tech? Because I don't anticipate that would be something that the program would necessarily be able to absorb with our current structure and personnel. So being able to identify, those logistical aspects so that we can fulfill the charge of also giving the legislature, approximate estimates of what kind of resources are needed, what the financial impact would be. So what I was thinking is we have identified dates over the next 4 weeks to bring the stakeholders together in a very focused fashion for 1-hour meetings. And we would move on to looking at municipal appeals after we talked about the Act 250 appeals, to look at that model, to see how that would be fleshed out. And then my anticipation is that would be more complicated and would require maybe 2 different targeted meetings. And then the last 2 meetings would be, we would wait and see what specific topics that we need to get further information and feedback on. But that's how I envision the next month, is continuing to develop important information so that we can perform the kind of financial analyses for the options that we're going to have to make decisions about, while at the same time making sure that we continue engaging with the stakeholders to make sure that the proposals that ultimately the board will be looking at is a cooperative endeavor between stakeholders and the board. So I'm trying to take the preliminary information, and I know people's opinions might change and with more information, but trying to figure out a way to sort of move forward on both fronts at the same time, since we're so short of really time to accomplish all of this.
By both fronts, Brooke, do you mean the funding mechanisms that we now need to report on, as well as the structural? Okay,
Yeah, to make sure that when we get to, okay, if, this is a board model that, we've gone kind of back and forth on a little bit, make sure that, I think on the record is something that the board is interested in pursuing to try to speed things up, that kind of thing. Maybe there's some, suggestion to hybrid it a little bit to make sure, you cover due process issues, that kind of thing. And then, but ultimately, and then what's the cost? So I need to be able to have Rachel's help to move forward to make sure she has plenty of time to analyze that. But that again is driven by, this is the model that we're suggesting, and this is how it's going to operate. Therefore, what do we need for tech, personnel, et cetera? And then what's the dollar figure? So I'm trying to collect that information as we are developing the board models so that we can get this done as early as possible and not feel stressed to try to be pulling out financial data at the last minute.
and have you had conversations with Rachel yet?
Not yet. We did,
Okay.
when she was away, I got
Okay.
bullet stuff with this other stuff, but that's my intention this week so that we can make sure that I understand what she will need as well. And we can work together to get what we need from the judiciary, for example.
Okay, thanks. Alex?
Thanks, Brooke, for your continued leadership and on this and being our shepherd. Couple questions. One, do you have a sense from the stakeholder group as to their capacity for these additional 5, targeted 1-hour meetings? Do you get the sense that they're, still invested and have time and availability to do this, or are they starting to peter out?
No, people were still very interested, but of course, like from each email that I'm sending at this point, I'm getting a certain number of people saying that they're on vacation. And so the reason why I've targeted 5 meetings is I wanted to be sure, and I did them on each week throughout July, was that I want to make sure that people are able to come. Like we may do 1 and 4 on the same topic, or 2 and 5. To make sure that if we don't get a good turnout or people are like, gee, I can't make these. But at this point, given our schedules, trying to find time to do it, I'm just doing these 1-hour opportunities. If you can't make it, we'll record it. You can watch it later. And then maybe those last 2 meetings, we duplicate or continue to talk about one of the prior drill down conversations. But I think people are very interested in continuing the conversation. And I think folks are actually sort of talking to each other to some degree. And I've encouraged that so that we can really get focused and get the elements at least hopefully decided on how we're going to look at these models and what components are going to exist in them.
So my other questions are, do you envision, I think when I look at our scheduling spreadsheet, it looks like, and I don't know if it's still up to date at this point, everything is shifting, maybe more on my tier 3 side than on your side, but I think it shows that the final appeals study submitted to the board in late October, and then we have a public meeting in there somewhere on appeals. I guess I'm wrong about that. No, it's the public meeting is on October 15th. So, I guess what I'm getting to is when do you anticipate, coming back to the board with like a draft, either an outline of a report or a draft report?
I'm not drafting a report yet. I think what I need to do is give the board all of the information. Here are some models. This is how the group has arrived at it could happen. And then I think that the board needs to pick it apart and make decisions about it. I mean, I'm not gonna write the history and all of that. That's not a problem. And Alex Key's setting up the template and already have information we're going to start loading in. But this is a study that has to make a final determination in the end. And so what I'm trying to do is collect all of the information, the opinions, and give the board, these are fully baked cakes. With the board's input, with the stakeholders' input, these are the best options that we have come up with. And now it's up to the board to say yay or nay on Act 250 appeals, yay or nay on municipal appeals. If so, when it could be in a phase thing many years into the future. I don't know. Or it could be stay with the court. But what I'm trying to do is create all of the information so that the board can sit down and analyze and make decisions about this. I'm not going to sit down and write a report because I don't know what to write. Other than,
Right.
Other than this is everything we've been through, the process, blah, blah, blah.
Right. So sorry I couched it that way. So let me rephrase. When do you anticipate us having those discussions on the models that we have to make recommendations on before you draft? But when do you see that happening? Is that in late August or September? Do you have a sense for that?
Way before that. So as I go through these focused 1-hour meetings, if we get to, okay, here's the Act 250 decisions most people are in favor of on the record, and then I'm going to come back to the board. That's why I'm trying to do things simultaneously, basically, is instead of saying, okay, board, here's all of the information, it's the middle of August and let's dig through it. I'm hoping to have this as a fluid process so that I'm giving you guys the feedback, and this is what they say for board model. So in, third week of July, you may see this is what the stakeholders have suggested that the board consider, and the board might say, no, we think that's not what we want. Go back to the drawing board, or we're going to change the things, and this is the model that we want, that kind of thing. And so in terms of the board input and the whole enchilada, I think by mid-August, that's where I hope to be. So that the end of August and July and September are the real nuts and bolts reporting, putting it all down on paper for decisions that the board is able to collectively make once we do have all that information. But if we can make these decisions piecemeal, we can write the report as we're going along for the different components.
Gotcha.
So you guys may get the municipal report and the board may say, well, it's going to be 5 years before we have the capacity because that's what it looks like for all of the things we have to do. And I don't think this is realistic and we're not going to embrace it. Or they might say, yeah, you know what, when our majority of our work is done, 3-4 years from now, yes, we would be in a position to do that, but we would need these extra resources.
Gotcha. Yeah, thank you for the clarification. I'm happy to roll with the process in that iterative way that you describe, if that's the way you think will be most effective in terms of engaging the stakeholders and us. Just know that sometimes it can be hard it can be hard for us to have a discussion about the whole enchilada if we're only looking at pieces of it and don't understand the other pieces. But I understand what you're saying, and I'm sure we can roll with that. I for one felt like the conversation we had without Sarah at a prior meeting I was excited about that conversation. I was interested to hear what the five of us were thinking along the lines of what this study is all about. And so, yeah, whenever we can get back to that, even if it's sort of piecemeal, I'm excited to have those conversations some more. Because as you could tell from last time, I have some opinions, but I also think better personally through dialogue. And so hearing everyone else's perspectives are going to help me evolve my thinking. My last question on process, Brooke, not substance, is given that it's going to be this iterative sort of work with the board and with stakeholders on discrete sort of components or aspects of it, do you think that you're going to want to, or that the stakeholders are going to want to be reconvened once the whole enchilada is talked about by the board and there's some direction? Or do you think because we're doing it like a little bit at a time that maybe that won't be necessary and stakeholders can have their final say, just like the public will, in the lead up to our public hearing?
No, I think that we do need to reconvene the entire group in a 3-hour meeting. Once we do that iterative process, if it were only a board, then, this is what the board position is, that kind of thing. So yeah, no, but I totally think it's very important. And, here's the thing. Many of the people who are our stakeholders have been invested in this process for decades, if not years. And they are very learned in this area. And I don't want them to feel like I took the Cliff Notes version of their positions and, then we went and baked a cake, because truly they are the experts. They have seen the history, the efficacy of everything over the years. And we need to listen to them, even though it's a board report. Certainly it's the board's decision, and I've made that pretty clear. But I think there's very significant ownership, and we need to honor that, because truly the wisdom is on both sides of the issue is really important for us to understand. So
Okay, thanks.
We're over time on this, but I think it's okay to spend a little bit more time on this. We have an early, 2:30 is all our agenda brings us to, and I think it's okay if we go a little past that. So Kirsten.
I was just going to quickly mention that I anticipate being prepared to share my comments when Sarah's with us on Thursday. I didn't offer much during last week's conversation about this, sort of put a pin in it.
Great.
So look forward to that. I sort of have some of my own sort of half-baked thoughts, but I want to make sure I deliver, something that reflects where we are. So I'll do that on Thursday. Yep.
Thank you. So shall we move on to tier 3, Alex?
Sure. So not a lot to report, actually, in terms of updates. The next stakeholder meeting will be next week on the 15th. And I've delivered to them a first draft of the rule, a spreadsheet that the VNRC folks helped with in identifying gaps in the protection of the various resource areas that the group has been discussing, I should say. And so they have that to chew on, and we're still waiting on the mapping, which is essential for this particular project because it really is a mapping project. And thankfully, I've been getting regular updates from our GIS expert in the Agency of Digital Services, including this morning. So I know he's making progress, and he indicated a couple weeks ago that he would likely need till the end of this week to finish that and to be able to get it up on our mapping website that's part of the Tier 3 web page. So it's all coming together for that first draft. And so I'm hopeful that the stakeholders will have enough to chew on for the next week's meeting on the 15th, so that they can give feedback, and then I can bring that to you so you can take a look at the first draft and their feedback on it thereafter.
Thank you, Alex. Kirsten. You're done with wood products. We need to get you and others working on some of the other things that we need to pick up. But do you have anything today that you want to report to us?
No, I'll just mention as a follow-up on wood products that Pete and Aaron and I have a meeting scheduled next week to just to talk about study implementation, and then we'll bring the conversation back to the board.
Okay, great.
So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Okay, next on the agenda is a proposed executive session. Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion. The board needs to discuss pending and probable Act 250 appeals and enforcement actions and have confidential attorney-client communications on these matters. Therefore, I move that we find that premature public knowledge of these matters would place the board at a substantial disadvantage and that the board enter executive session.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you, Alex. Any discussion? Hearing and seeing none, will all those in favor please say aye? Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
That was unanimous. The board will go into executive session and report back afterward. So hang tight. Okay, we are still recording and we are back. I believe we have a motion to entertain. We have a volunteer.
Make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Oh, nope, the other motion.
Oh,
Right. How about we not
Sorry.
second Kirsten's motion
Yeah.
and proceed to another one? Yeah, I'll make a motion to authorize legal staff to enter an appearance on behalf of the board with regard to docket number 25 ENV 00048.
a
Second,
second. Oh,
Seconded. Thank you. Any discussion on that? Okay, hearing, seeing none. Will all those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
aye.
That was unanimous of those who are with us today. Thank you. Now, Kirsten.
Now I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Okay,
Second.
thank you, Alex. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
That was unanimous. Thank you all. See you later.
Thanks.